Elle had heard the stories about humans since she was a child. Her teachers spoke of them in hushed voices. They described a species born on a death world, a planet of extreme temperatures, violent storms, and predators at every corner. They said humans were dangerous. They said humans carried a fury inside them that could burn entire civilizations to ash. But when Elle first met Cole at the Cultural Exchange Festival on Prime, she saw none of that danger. She saw only a quiet woman with soft brown eyes and a gentle smile. They were a peaceful species. Their of Prime was a place of crystalline towers and floating gardens. They had no military. They had no weapons. They believed in harmony above all things, and they solved their conflicts through art and meditation. Elle was one of their most celebrated artists. She created empathic sculptures that could make viewers feel emotions they had never experienced before. Her work was known across 3 star systems, and she had been invited to display her latest piece at the festival. Was there as a diplomatic. She worked at the small human embassy that had been established 2 years earlier. Most avoided the humans. They were polite but distant. The warnings from the galactic community had made them nervous, but Elle was curious. She watched standing alone near one of her sculptures, studying it with genuine interest. The human seemed lost in thought, her head tilted slightly as she examined the flowing crystal forms. Elle approached her. She asked if the human understood what the sculpture was meant to convey, turned to her and smiled. She said she was not sure, but that looking at it made her feel like standing in warm rain after a long drought. Elle was surprised. That was exactly what she had intended. Most aliens could not sense the emotions in her work. Humans were supposed to be blunt creatures with limited sensitivity, but this one had understood perfectly. They talked for hours that night, asked questions about art and culture. She listened carefully to every answer. She never interrupted. She never tried to impress Elle with stories of human achievements. She simply listened and learned. When the festival ended, Elle found herself hoping she would see the human again. Over the following months, they met often, would visit Elle's studio and watch her work. She would bring small gifts from the human embassy, strange foods and curious objects from Earth. Elle learned that enjoyed reading poetry and tending to small plants. She learned that had a calm presence that made even the most anxious feel at ease. There was nothing frightening about her. There was nothing that suggested the terrible fury the galaxy spoke of. Elle's feelings grew stronger. She had never expected to bond with an alien, certainly not a human, but had become the center of her thoughts. When she was not with her, Elle found herself counting the hours until they would meet again. She knew her people would not understand. She knew her father would be horrified, but she could not deny what she felt. When she finally told how she felt, the human was quiet for a long moment. Then tears appeared in her eyes, and she reached out to take Elle's hand. She said she had been afraid to speak first. She said she had not wanted to frighten Elle away. Humans had such terrible reputations, and she had worried that Elle would eventually see her as a monster like everyone else did. Elle held her close and told her she saw no monster. She saw only the woman she loved. The announcement of their union sent ripples through society. Elle's father, Elder, came to her home with fury in his silver eyes. He demanded to know why she would bond herself to a human. He reminded her of the stories, of the wars humans had fought, of the destruction they had caused. He said humans were barely more than intelligent beasts driven by violent instincts. He begged her to reconsider. Elle refused. She told her father that was nothing like the stories. She was kind and gentle and patient. She had never raised her voice in anger. She had never shown any sign of the violence humans were supposed to carry in their blood. Elder shook his head in disappointment. He said Elle was young and foolish. He said she would learn the truth eventually. Then he left, and Elle did not see him again for many weeks. The council debated for 3 days before approving the union. They saw no legal reason to forbid it, though many of them clearly disapproved. Ambassador Tess Morgan from the Human Embassy attended the meeting to speak on behalf of her people. She assured the council that humanity wished only for peaceful relations with the. She said that Cole was one of the finest representatives of her species, and that the union would strengthen the bonds between their peoples. The council agreed, though their acceptance was reluctant. The wedding ceremony was held in a garden of floating flowers beneath the 3 moons of Prime. Elle wore traditional bonding silks that shimmered with every color of the spectrum, wore a simple white dress in the human fashion. They exchanged vows in both languages, promising to protect and cherish each other for the rest of their days. When they kissed to seal the bond, Elle felt a warmth spread through her entire body. She had never been so happy. That night, as they lay together in their new home, Elle asked why the galaxy feared humans so much, was quiet for a long time. Then she said that humans were not always gentle. She said that under certain circumstances they could become something else entirely. But she promised Elle that she would never have to see that side of her. She promised that their life together would be peaceful and calm. Elle believed her. She closed her eyes and drifted into sleep, feeling safe in her human wife's arms. But deep in the night, Elle woke to the sound of whimpering in her sleep. The human was caught in some terrible dream, her face twisted with pain and fear. Her hands clutched at the sheets as if grasping for a weapon that was not there. Elle reached out to wake her, and when her eyes snapped open, there was something in them that Elle had never seen before. Something cold and hard and dangerous. It vanished in an instant, replaced by confusion and then embarrassment. Apologized and said it was just a bad dream. She held Elle close and told her everything was fine. But as Elle drifted back to sleep, she could not shake the memory of that look in her eyes. For just a moment, she had glimpsed something hidden beneath her wife's gentle surface. And for the first time, she wondered if the stories about humans might hold some truth after all. 6 months passed, and life was everything Elle had hoped it would be. They settled into a comfortable routine in their small home at the edge of the Crystal City, continued her work at the human embassy during the day while Elle created her sculptures in her studio. In the evenings, they would cook meals together, blending human and recipes into something new. They would sit on their balcony and watch the 3 moons rise over the distant mountains. They would talk about small things and large things and everything in between. It was a peaceful life, and Elle treasured every moment of it. She learned many things about humans during those months. She learned that they needed more sleep than but could push through exhaustion when necessary. She learned that they formed deep emotional bonds with almost anything, including plants and animals and even machines. Had named every plant in their garden and spoke to them as if they could understand her. She had a small stuffed animal from her childhood on Earth that she kept on her pillow. She treated it with such tenderness that Elle found it endearing rather than strange. She also learned that humans had curious rituals around food and drink, would not eat until Elle was seated at the table with her. She always offered the first portion to her wife before serving herself. When they had visitors, would prepare enough food to feed twice as many people as were present. She explained that on Earth, sharing food was one of the most important ways humans showed love and care. A guest should never leave hungry. A loved one should never want for anything. Elle's brother visited often. He had been skeptical of the marriage at first, but curiosity had overcome his caution. He found fascinating in the way a scientist might find a rare specimen fascinating. He asked her endless questions about human biology and culture and history, answered them all with patience and good humor. She showed him pictures of Earth, of its blue oceans and green forests and vast deserts. She told him about human cities with millions of inhabitants living in towering buildings. She told him about human music and art and literature. One evening, asked about human wars. He had read the Galactic archives and knew that humans had a long history of violence. He wanted to understand why a species would fight so often against itself. Smile faded slightly. She said that humans were complicated creatures. They could love deeply, but they could also hate deeply. They fought for resources and territory and ideology. They fought for pride and revenge and fear. But most often, she said, they fought to protect the people and things they loved. A human would burn down the entire galaxy to keep their family safe. Asked if had ever fought, the question hung in the air for a long moment. Elle watched her wife carefully. Something flickered behind her eyes, something distant and shadowed. Then she smiled again and changed the subject. She asked if he would like to try a human dessert called chocolate cake. The moment passed, but Elle did not forget the look on her wife's face. After left that night, Elle asked about her past. She knew so little about the years before they met, had spoken of her childhood on Earth, of her parents and her younger sister, of the small town where she grew up. But she never spoke of the years between leaving Earth and arriving on Prime. There was a gap in her story that she seemed unwilling to fill. Was quiet for a long time. Then she said that some memories were better left buried. She said that she had done things she was not proud of, things that had been necessary at the time but that haunted her still. She asked Elle to trust her and to let the past stay in the past. Elle agreed, though the curiosity burned inside her. A few weeks later, Elle found something while cleaning their home. It was a small box hidden in the back of a storage compartment. Inside were several medals and ribbons in human military colors. There were citations for valor and commendations for service above and beyond the call of duty. There was a photograph of a younger in military uniform, standing with a group of other humans in similar attire. They all had the same hard look in their eyes, the look of people who had seen terrible things. Elle put the box back where she found it. She did not mention it, too, but she began to notice things she had overlooked before. The way always sat with her back to the wall in public places. The way her eyes constantly scanned crowds for threats. The way she moved with a fluid grace that seemed practiced rather than natural. The way she woke instantly at the slightest unexpected sound. The nightmares continued. Nearly every night would thrash and moan in her sleep. Sometimes she would speak words in human military codes that Elle did not understand. Sometimes she would call out names that meant nothing to Elle but clearly meant everything too. In the morning, she would apologize and say she was fine. Elle would hold her and tell her that she did not need to apologize. One evening, a news broadcast mentioned rising tensions with the Empire. They were an aggressive species from the far side of the galaxy. They had been expanding their territory for decades, conquering weaker civilizations and absorbing them into their empire. They had always been too distant and too insignificant to attract their attention, but now they were looking for new worlds to claim, and Prime was in their path. Elle watched the broadcast with mild concern. Surely they would not bother with a peaceful world like Prime. They had nothing of value to offer and no ability to resist. Conquering them would bring the nothing but trouble from the galactic community. But when she looked she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her wife was staring at the screen with an expression Elle had never seen before. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were clenched into fists. Her eyes had that same cold hardness that Elle had glimpsed on their wedding night. It was the look of a predator sizing up a threat. Then noticed Elle watching her. The expression vanished instantly, replaced by a warm smile. She said it was probably nothing to worry about. She said the Galactic Council would surely intervene if they threatened a peaceful world. She suggested they go to bed early and forget about politics. But as they lay in the darkness that night, Elle felt's body tense beside her. Her wife was not sleeping. She was thinking, planning, preparing for something. Elle reached out and took her hand, squeezed back gently but said nothing. For the first time since their wedding, Elle felt afraid. Not of, but of whatever was coming. And she realized that her gentle, patient, soft-spoken wife might not be as harmless as she appeared. The demands arrived 3 weeks later. They wanted the entire northern continent of Prime for a military outpost. They wanted exclusive mining rights to the crystal deposits beneath the sacred mountains. They wanted to provide labor for their construction projects. And they wanted an answer within 10 days, or they would take what they wanted by force. The council gathered in emergency session. Elle watched the proceedings on the public broadcast with growing dread. The council members spoke in frightened voices. They had no military to defend themselves. They had no weapons to resist an invasion. They had spent 10,000 years building a civilization based on peace and harmony, and now that civilization was about to be crushed by an empire that respected only strength. Council leader Hen addressed the assembly. She said that they had two choices. They could accept the demands and hope that cooperation would spare them the worst of the occupation, or they could refuse and watch their people be slaughtered in a war they could not win. She recommended acceptance. It was the only logical choice. Elle turned off the broadcast. She felt sick. Her entire world was about to be handed over to conquerors, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. She looked at, hopping for some comfort, but her wife was not there. She had left early that morning for the embassy and had not returned. When finally came home that night, she seemed different. There was a tension in her movements that had not been there before. She smiled and kissed Elle and asked about her day, but her eyes were distant. She was thinking about something else. She was planning something. The next day, a delegation arrived on Prime to negotiate the terms of surrender. They came with armed guards and military vehicles, and an arrogance that made Elle's skin crawl. The leader of the delegation was a commander named Al. He was tall and broad, with scales and yellow eyes that held nothing but contempt for the. He walked through the crystal streets as if he already owned them. Elle was in the central plaza when the delegation passed through. She had come to witness the negotiations, though she knew the outcome was already decided, had insisted on coming with her. She said she wanted to see them for herself. She said she needed to understand what they were dealing with. The plaza was crowded with watching the delegation in fearful silence. Commander Al stopped in the center and looked around with obvious disdain. He said something to one of his guards and they both laughed. Then his eyes fell on Elle. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. He asked if she was the who had married a human. Word had spread through the sector, apparently. A disgusting union between a primitive ape and a cowardly crystal spinner. He laughed again and reached out to touch Elle's face. He said perhaps they would take her as a prize after the conquest, a curiosity to display in their collections. Elle froze. She could not move, could not speak, could not do anything but stand there as this monster touched her. She had never experienced violence before. She did not know how to respond to it. Then stepped between them. She did not raise her voice. She did not make threats. She simply placed herself between her wife and the commander and looked up at him with those soft brown eyes. But something had changed in those eyes. They were no longer soft. They were hard and cold and utterly without fear. Elle had seen predators on nature documentaries. She had seen the way they looked at prey before they struck. Had that same look now. Commander Al towered over her by more than a foot. He outweighed her by at least 100 pounds. He was a trained warrior from a species bred for conquest. And yet he hesitated. Something in his gaze made him pause. Some instinct buried deep in his reptilian brain screamed at him to back away from this small, quiet human. Spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. She said that Elle was under her protection. She said that anyone who touched her wife would regret it for the rest of their very short life. She said these words calmly, without emotion, as if she were stating a simple fact like the color of the sky. The plaza was silent. Every watched in terrified fascination. Every guard had their hands on their weapons. Commander Al stared at for a long moment. Then he laughed, but it was a forced laugh, hollow and uncertain. He said the human had spirit. He said it would be amusing to break that spirit after the conquest. Then he turned and walked away, his guards following close behind. Helped Elle to her feet. Her hands were trembling, though her face remained calm. She asked if Elle was hurt. She apologized for not acting sooner. She said they should go home now. That night, Elle finally asked the question she had been avoiding for months. She asked who she really was. She asked about the medals and the nightmares and the look in her eyes when she faced Commander Al. She asked why a simple diplomatic could make a warrior hesitate with nothing but a glance. Was quiet for a long time, then she began to speak. She had not always been a diplomat. Before coming to Prime, she had served in the human military for 15 years. She had fought in the frontier wars against 3 different species. She had led combat missions behind enemy lines. She had done things that still haunted her dreams. She had killed more enemies than she could count. She had come to Prime to escape that life. She had wanted peace. She had wanted to forget the person she used to be, and for a while with Elle, she had found that peace. But now the violence was coming to her doorstep again, and she could not simply stand by and watch the people she loved be conquered. Elle asked what she planned to do, smiled sadly. She said she had already sent a message to an old friend. She said help was coming, though she could not promise it would arrive in time. She said she hoped it would not come to violence, but if it did, she would do whatever was necessary to protect her wife and her new home. Elle held her wife close. She finally understood why the galaxy feared humans. It was not because they were strong or fierce or aggressive. It was because of what they became when someone they loved was threatened. The fury was real, and it was terrifying, and it was all born from love. And now that fury was about to be unleashed. The fleet arrived on the 8th day. 20 warships dropped out of hyperspace above Prime, their weapons already powered and their troops ready for deployment. Commander Al sent a final message to the Council. He said their time for negotiation was over. He said they had 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or he would begin bombardment of their cities. Council Leader Hen prepared the surrender broadcast. They had no choice. They had no weapons, no ships, no soldiers. They could not fight. They could only hope that submission would spare them the worst of what was coming. Elle stood on her balcony watching the distant shapes of the warships blocking out the stars. She felt hollow inside. Everything she had ever known was about to end. Her world, her culture, her people, all of it would be crushed beneath boots. She looked at her wife and saw something unexpected, was smiling. Before Elle could ask why, a new shape appeared in the sky. A single vessel dropped out of hyperspace between the fleet and the planet. It was much smaller than the warships, barely 1/10 of their size. It was angular and dark and covered in weapons. It was a human ship. The vessel identified itself as the Resolute Dawn, a destroyer-class warship of the United Earth Navy. Its commander, Captain Grant, sent a message on all frequencies. He said that the human citizens of Prime were under the protection of Earth. He said that any attack on the planet would be considered an act of war against humanity. He strongly advised them to reconsider their plans. Commander Al responded with laughter. 1 ship against 20. The humans were known for their stubbornness, but this was simply foolish. He ordered his fleet to ignore the human vessel and proceed with the invasion. Captain Grant sent another message. His voice was calm and steady. He said that he understood they outnumbered him. He said he was not asking them to surrender. He was simply informing them that if they proceeded, they would have to go through him first. And he promised that going through him would cost them dearly. The flagship fired the first shot. A massive energy beam lanced across space toward the Resolute Dawn. The human ship moved with impossible speed, dodging the blast and returning fire with a barrage of missiles and rounds. The flagship's shields flickered under the assault. Elle watched in disbelief as the tiny human ship engaged the entire fleet. It danced between enemy vessels, too fast to target, too agile to pin down. Its weapons fired constantly, striking at weak points with surgical precision. Within minutes, 2 ships were disabled and drifting. But 1 ship could not hold forever. They began to coordinate their attacks, boxing the Resolute Dawn in with overlapping fire. The human vessel took hit after hit, its hull burning, its systems failing. It kept fighting anyway. It refused to retreat. Watched the battle with tears streaming down her face. She knew those people up there. She had served with some of them. They were dying to buy time for a planet that was not even their home. She turned to Elle and said it was time. She said she had hoped it would not come to this, but now she had no choice. She had to do what she was trained to do. She had to fight. Elle did not understand. What could one woman do against an invasion fleet? But led her to a storage room in the back of their home. She opened a hidden compartment that Elle had never noticed before. Inside was human combat armor, black and angular, covered in weapons. Inside was the equipment of a soldier. Explained as she dressed, they would not expect ground resistance from the. They would send landing parties to secure key locations, confident that they would face no opposition, but had spent the last several weeks quietly training volunteers, young who were tired of being helpless, who wanted to learn how to defend themselves. They were not soldiers, but they were brave, and they were willing to fight. Elle was stunned. She had no idea her wife had been doing any of this, smiled sadly and said she had not wanted to worry her. She said she had hoped they would back down before it came to this. But hope was not a strategy, and preparation was the difference between survival and extinction. A communication came through from Ambassador Tess Morgan at the human embassy. More ships were on the way. A human battle group had been dispatched the moment the fleet was detected. They would arrive within hours. All they had to do was hold on until then. Kissed Elle one last time. She said she had to go now. She said she would come back, she promised. Then she was gone, moving through the streets toward the gathering point where her volunteers waited. Elle followed despite her terror. She could not let her wife face this alone. The first landing craft touched down in the central plaza. Soldiers poured out, weapons raised, expecting no resistance. They found and her volunteers waiting for them behind improvised barricades. The battle was brutal and chaotic. The volunteers were untrained and terrified, but they held their ground, moved among them like a force of nature, directing fire, calling out targets, pulling the wounded to safety. She was everywhere at once, her weapons never silent, her voice never wavering. Elle watched her wife become someone else entirely. This was not the gentle woman who tended plants and recited poetry. This was a warrior, cold and efficient and utterly merciless. She killed soldiers without hesitation, without remorse, without pause. And yet even in the midst of combat, she was protecting. Every move she made was designed to keep her volunteers alive. Every shot she fired was in defense of her home. The plaza became a graveyard for ambitions. Landing craft after landing craft was repelled. Soldiers who expected easy prey found themselves in a deadly trap. They had never faced humans in battle before. They had heard the stories but dismissed them as propaganda. Now they understood that the stories were true. Above the planet, the resolute Dawn was dying. Its hull was torn open. Its weapons were failing, but it still fought. It blocked landing routes and disrupted communications. It made them pay for every inch of space they claimed. And on the ground, Cole showed the galaxy why humanity was feared. Not because humans were strong, not because they were cruel, but because when you threatened someone they loved, they became something unstoppable, something that would never surrender, something that would fight until the last breath left their body. The battle for Prime had only just begun. The night was endless. Elle lost track of how many hours passed as the battle raged across her city. The beautiful crystal towers that had stood for thousands of years were with weapon fire. The floating gardens burned and crashed to the ground. The streets she had walked her entire life were filled with smoke and debris and bodies. But they held, against all expectations, against all logic they held. Had positioned her volunteers at every key intersection, and they fought with weapons they had only learned to use weeks ago, following the instructions their human teacher had drilled into them. They were not soldiers. They were artists and scholars and workers who had never imagined they would hold weapons in their hands. But they fought anyway, because had taught them that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite fear. Elle stayed close to throughout the night. She could not fight, but she could help in other ways. She carried supplies to the barricades. She helped drag wounded volunteers to safety. She held the hands of dying and told them they were brave. She watched her wife command the defense with a calm authority that seemed inhuman. They kept coming. Wave after wave of soldiers poured from their landing craft. Commander Al had committed fully to the ground assault, determined to crush the unexpected resistance through sheer numbers. He had never encountered a human in battle before. He did not understand that humans did not break. He did not understand that every casualty only made them fight harder. As dawn approached, the situation grew desperate. Ammunition was running low. The volunteers were exhausted. The barricades were crumbling. Gathered her remaining fighters in the central plaza, the last defensible position in the city. She told them they had done more than anyone could have asked. She told them help was coming. She told them they just had to hold a little longer. Then the sky lit up with fire. The human battle group dropped out of hyperspace directly above the fleet. 12 warships, including 2 heavy cruisers and the dreadnought Liberty's Call. They came in weapons blazing, catching the completely off guard. The damaged Resolute Dawn had been transmitting tactical data throughout the battle, giving the reinforcements perfect targeting information. The space battle lasted less than 30 minutes. The fleet, already worn down by their long engagement with the Resolute Dawn, collapsed under the human assault. Ships were destroyed one after another. Commander Al's flagship was crippled by a direct hit to its engines. He tried to flee, but human Marines boarded his vessel and captured him before he could escape. On the ground, the soldiers received word that their fleet was destroyed. Their commanders were dead or captured. No reinforcements were coming. They had 2 choices. They could surrender or they could die. Most chose to surrender. Watched the drop their weapons with an expression El could not read. There was relief there, but also exhaustion that went far deeper than physical tiredness. The fury that had sustained her through the night was fading, leaving behind only a profound weariness. She had become the thing she had tried to escape, and the weight of that transformation was visible in every line of her body. The human Marines secured the city within hours. Medical teams treated the wounded. Engineers began assessing the damage. A human admiral came down to personally thank for her defense of the planet. He said her actions had saved countless lives. He said she was a hero. Did not respond to the praise. She simply asked if she could go home now. Elle took her wife home through streets that were barely recognizable. The beautiful city was in ruins. It would take years to rebuild, but they were alive. Their civilization had survived, and it had survived because one human had refused to let it fall. In their damaged home, finally broke down. The wall she had built around herself crumbled, and all the pain and fear and guilt she had been holding back came flooding out. She wept in Elle's arms like a child. She apologized for bringing violence to this peaceful world. She apologized for becoming the monster the galaxy always said humans were. She apologized for not being the gentle person Elle had married. Elle held her close and whispered that she had nothing to apologize for. She said was not a monster. Monsters did not weep for the lives they took. Monsters did not fight to protect others. Monsters did not love so deeply that they would sacrifice everything to keep that love safe. She understood now why the galaxy feared human fury. It was not because humans were violent by nature. It was because their capacity for love was so vast, so deep, so overwhelming, that when it was threatened, they would become anything necessary to defend it. The fury was not the opposite of love. The fury was love transformed into its most terrifying form. In the days that followed, Prime began to heal. They had been changed by the experience. They were no longer the naive pacifists they had been before. They understood now that peace was not simply the absence of conflict. Peace had to be defended. Peace had to be fought for. And sometimes peace required fury. Elder came to visit his daughter. He had watched the battle from the shelters with the other elders. He had seen lead the defense. He had seen her volunteers hold the line against impossible odds. He no longer spoke of humans as primitive beasts. He called daughter and asked for her forgiveness. The council offered humanity a permanent alliance. They asked for military advisors to help them build a defense force of their own. They asked for the protection of the United Earth Navy, and they asked Cole to serve as the official liaison between their peoples. Accepted, she could not escape what she was, but perhaps she could use what she was to do some good. On the anniversary of the battle, Elle stood together on their rebuilt balcony, watching the three moons rise over mountains that still bore the scars of war. The Resolute Dawn's wreckage had been turned into a memorial in the central plaza, a reminder of the sacrifice humans had made for a world that was not their own. Elle took her wife's hand and asked her a question she had been thinking about for a long time. She asked if ever regretted marrying her, if she regretted being drawn back into violence, if she regretted becoming the Fury again. Was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to look at Elle with those soft brown eyes, the eyes that had first captured Elle's heart at the cultural festival so long ago. She said she had many regrets in her life. She regretted the lives she had taken. She regretted the innocence she had lost. She regretted the person she had been forced to become. But she did not regret loving Elle. She did not regret fighting for her. She did not regret a single moment of the life they had built together. Because that was the truth about human fury. It was not a curse. It was not a flaw. It was a gift. It was the fire that let humans protect the things that mattered most. And for nothing mattered more than the gentle artist who had seen past the warnings and the stories and the fear and had chosen to love her anyway. The galaxy would always fear human fury, but Elle had learned that fury's secret. It was just love wearing armor. And she would never be afraid of it again.